Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Orbit's first panel. It is 6 p.m. Central on Friday, April 13th, 2018, and this is the Representation and Fan Art panel. I will leave it to the participants to introduce themselves. Take it away, Jade.
I am Jade Hawk, which is pretty much the name I'm known on the internet and in many places off the internet as well. And I'll be more or less moderating this panel, but I will probably also throw in my own opinion occasionally. And I'm having three panelists with me. There's Alex, also known as Sunflower Punk. She blogs under that name at Orbit. And we have Krista, who has joined. And we have Jason D, who is also he has a Facebook page called Bearded Queer, and our Twitter handles should all be linked either at the YouTube or at the OrbitCon link. And we're going to be talking today about basically queer and to some degree maybe also neurodivergent representation in any kind of fiction, and the complete really lack thereof. That's pretty good. We get some crumbs here and there, and that's it. And basically about how fan fiction, fan art, any kind of fan creations have to fill these gaps, like whether it's completely making up queer representation in stories, whether it's taking some one sentence said somewhere and expanding it, or anything on this topic, basically. I want to just start with everybody maybe giving some idea why they decided to join me in this panel, other than because I asked them like a million times.
Technically, you didn't ask me at all. I believe I volunteered when you just put out a general call, but for me, it's just sort of been the queerness of my identity and sexuality and things like that have sort of come into focus in my life over the last couple of years, far more than ever before in my life. And things like fan art and fan fiction have become way more important and relevant to me, because the feeling that I've had my whole life of not being shown anybody like me in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm white, so there's a lot of white people in media, but other qualities about myself were never really shown. And so that's something that's very important to me. And one of the biggest reasons I wanted to be on the panel.
All right, thanks.
All right, who talks? You talk, I talk?
You can go first.
All right, I think I also volunteered to be on the panel. Kind of jumped at it because, in part because I write fan fiction, and I'm really passionate about, I mean, kind of have to be to write it, you know, my ships and such. But also, you're talking about neuroatypicality and being able to take the little bits of sort of kind of representations that they put in and be able to flesh that out. It means a lot to me, because my intersections don't get represented well in most other media, unless I'm looking at very indie stuff, being non-binary and mentally ill. So that's why I'm here.
So Jay did ask me if I wanted to be on the panel, and at first I was like, yeah, sure. But as the day got closer, I was kind of like, why did I do this to myself? But I'm here now, and I'm queer, literally. For me, it's I write for the Orbit, but I'm also an artist, and for me, it's basically drawing what I don't see a lot of, or like a lot of, for me, apart from like my queerness and neurodivergency, there's also the whole like race issues. I'm Puerto Rican, and like fat acceptance, because you don't see a lot of queer, brown, fat drawings or media really. And if we are represented, it's usually in a negative light. So for me, I wanted to be able to talk about what it means for me as someone who doesn't see a lot of themselves represented in media in any sort of way, unless it's negative. And just to be able to share my thoughts and feelings with hopefully other like-minded individuals.
All right, thanks. So we have me including 2 visual artists and 1 fan writer and 1 person who just really, really likes reading and watching that stuff, if I understand this correctly.
Yes.
Okay. So of the various, really various media, whether we're talking movies or comics or books even, I guess, what are characters or ships, which I should probably also explain. Ships are when fans make relationships of characters in a story or a movie or a fandom in any case. Anyway, so what characters, what ships, what storylines in anywhere in fiction are things that really interest you personally. So for me, for example, the first big one was just having Harley Quinn introduced, and then she started out as Joker's girlfriend, but that's just horrible. She's clearly and obviously in a queer relationship with Ivy, and I will not have anybody say otherwise. So that was my first big thing. Later, I switched over to Marvel, and now it's basically Loki, because Loki is easily the queerest person that we have in, I think, all of comics, but I might be wrong. I'll explain that later since I don't want to take over too much.
Oh, I can jump in here because I started as complete Super Wholock trash. That's Supernatural, Doctor Who, and Sherlock, back when that was a big thing on Tumblr. And I too could just go on about all of my favorite things because I kind of considered my fandoms to be part of my special interests, so I could monologue at you for hours about it. But Star Wars has always been a big thing. Star Trek, sci-fi, all of that stuff. And I will stop here before I just keep going.
For me, like Loki, definitely, because I think for a lot of times the villains are usually queer coded, which is, you know, why I end up liking them better than the actual heroes. I've been watching a lot of Once Upon a Time lately, and I just keep imagining, like, instead of all like the heterosexual relationships going on in that show, just be like Regina, which is like the evil queen, and like just everybody just ditching the men and all the women just getting together, because you know that would make for much more interesting TV, at least for me. The other one, which I'm actually working on drawing, or which I drew but I have to fix it, has been Xena and Gabrielle. They are like so gay, and I love it. So yeah, those are like the big ones for me. Also, Sailor Moon, like in the manga, it's much well, and then the manga and the Japanese dub, or like the original Japanese, they had the lesbian character, two of the Sailor Scouts, but the whole group in general, they usually Sailor Moon tends to really like girls, just from like the comments she makes and stuff like that, where she thinks the girl is like super pretty, and it's almost like she doesn't know if she wants to be them or be with them. So like, you know, it's just little things like that that most people might not read into it. But again, since we're so starved for representation, we take any little crumb and just be like, yes, they're gay and this is ours, and that's it.
So I keep thinking about this as you each have talked about yours. For me, like I really identify with the term headcanon, where you're just sort of like, this is what actually happened. You can't tell me any different. Very much like what Jade said. This is the actual situation. I don't care what the actual show tells everybody happened. And things like that. Even, I think for me, part of it started with I played World of Warcraft for a lot of years, and headcanon some of my characters as queer, non-binary, things like that, because it made me feel more comfortable and more interested in them. And sometimes it starts with, like, I had a friend made a comment about what could have happened in the whitest show on earth, Friends, and immediately in my head came this fully formed headcanon of Monica is both asexual and aromantic, and she's in a relationship with Joey and Chandler, who are in a relationship with each other, and she's raising like 6 kids, and they're sort of like they're helping her, but it's very complicated, and we don't really need to get into all of the details of that particular headcanon, but it just helps me even enjoy after the fact, because I haven't actually sat down and watched Friends in I don't know how many years. Stuff that I consumed when I was under the understanding that I was cisgender and heterosexual, as ill-advised that self-image was.
I kind of want to jump in just to comment that, like, yes, the headcanon of everyone is queer and trans, and you cannot tell me otherwise. Good day. I'm on that train with y'all.
All right, thanks. What I should also do before we go much further is I want to let everybody know that you can submit questions to the panel on the Orbit blog. What you do is you go to the, one second here. Okay, you go to orbit.con, click on the OrbitCon banner, and then you go to the representation and Fanart panel, and that should get you to where you can submit questions. All right. I hope I didn't screw that up. All right, so talk about some of the headcanons for characters that you've had, where characters that you see in media, you may have decided, okay, these people definitely neurodivergent, or definitely queer, or definitely trans, definitely gay, whatever. Just, you can even info dump. It's okay, at least for a while. I'll stop you if it gets too far.
Where to even start, though?
I have broken my panelists.
Too many.
I mean, the one that pops up for me is Pearl from Steven Universe. She's very much neurodivergent. I don't care what anybody says. She's she's one of us. Yeah, that's like one of the. I mean, the whole show in general is really gay, which I love. But as far as neurodivergency goes, I think for me, like Pearl is definitely neurodivergent. It's just a lot of things that I recognize of myself and of my friends in her, which you usually don't get to see much of, which is why it's so important, like these headcanons set for us, because it's like nobody can tell me that she's, normal, quote unquote, to use an imperfect word, but yeah, so that's like the biggest one for me.
So, thinking about neurodivergence, I think a thing that happens both when it comes to neurodivergent representation and queer representation is they will code things as much as they possibly can in those ways, but deny it because then they are not responsible for that, how they're actually representing those things. Queer coding villains. I've been an off and on fan of the show, but The Big Bang Theory with Sheldon, he's clearly neurodivergent, but they refuse to actually label it in a specific way. And when you finally sort of go, but I mean, he's autistic, and you realize the show is sort of about a group of friends who just sort of treat their autistic friend like crap, you're like, that's awful. And so you look for other ways to find good representation of yourself and the experience that you've had in your life. So
I tend to identify really strongly with the robots and aliens data. The android from Dark Matter, absolutely love her, but like that doesn't really count as headcanoning someone is neurodivergent because they're the robots and the aliens. That's more of a problematic trope coding than it is reclamatory,
I definitely agree with that. Having watched, started watching Dark Matter semi-recently, the android does very much come off as autistic. Granted, she's a robot, so problems. At the same time, I think that only happens because of how othered neurodivergence is. Yeah.
So, do you actually want to talk about that bit a little bit? Because I think that actually happens quite a bit. Data is, I think, one good example of a robot that reads autistic. Another person who reads neurodivergent sometimes is Spock, who is an alien. And there's a couple other situations where in order to see something that feels like neurodivergent or autistic representation, you have to go to the aliens and the robots. So do you want to talk about that a little bit more, maybe? Because I think that's a good topic for a moment.
Absolutely. In fact, I had another example, which was kind of also in the realm of awful, though not aliens or robots, which was I really identified with Dexter from the popular Showtime show, who is a serial killer. And specifically, so as not to worry anybody, specifically it had to do with a line that he spoke early on in the show, which essentially was, the people around me expect me to have these emotions and react in these ways, and I don't. And like not having these emotions the way that they expect in itself doesn't bother me, but knowing that that's different than other people does. And that in very particular, I didn't really identify with actually murdering anybody, I promise. that in very particular form is how I felt about a lot of things. I spent so much of my life, time and energy studying how other people acted and what they thought and felt, because I thought I was supposed to emulate that. And to have somebody else say those words out loud of I'm just not like other people was really empowering. Also realizing that not everybody uses as much time and energy and brain power to act in social situations as I was doing was also freeing, because then I'm like, if not everybody's doing this, then I don't actually need to. I can just figure it out and I don't have to act perfectly for everyone. So it was definitely a step along the way of my journey.
I could think of one character who's almost good representation. That's Abed from Community. I say almost because Dan Harmon. But it actually, you know, he in character kind of deconstructs or comments on the tropes. At one point, somebody asks him, you know, can't you just pull magic detective thing because you're special, and he just roasts them for the next 5 minutes, you know. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that character.
I am aware they exist. I have not seen the show.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I am very aware of that character existing, but I have not seen the show either.
Same for me.
Another villain-coded neurodivergent character that has been sort of wonderful, but is also the villain, so it can only be so good in terms of representation, is Kingpin in the Daredevil Netflix show, who is very clearly neurodivergent and has sensory issues and things like this, that I struggle to find another representation of somebody who has such sensory issues, that also made me feel more comfortable knowing, like, seeing that portrayal as well.
Now I want to rewatch Daredevil.
My work is done. I'm gonna go now.
Yeah, Daredevil's Kingpin is definitely, I think, very much autistic coded, even if they never say it. But yeah, I can totally see that. Another character that I think works in that way is from Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Mantis turned out a little bit of a punching bag in that movie, and she is very neurodivergent coded. She can't even smile. Like, her first attempt at smiling just looks creepy because it's so obviously fake. And then she just takes everything that people say to her more or less at face value, even though if she touches them, she knows whether what they just said might have been true or not. When they say things to her, when people say things to her, she just takes it at face value and accepts it. And I think that makes her very much autistic coded. And again, because she is like that, she ends up being the punching bag of the movie, which is its own kind of problematic.
Guardians of the Galaxy has a bunch of different characters that different groups of neurodiverse people relate to, like it's the guy. It's played by Batista, the big blue guy with the, what's his name?
Drax.
Drax, thank you. In the not understanding figurative language, although again being a punching bag. Weirdly enough, I empathize a lot with Groot, just because sometimes I go functionally nonverbal, and being able to communicate even without having a lot of words was nice to see on screen.
I definitely identified with that, but also from a different perspective of, I won't say I've never gone nonverbal, but it's very rare for me. Whereas I have a family that has had that go on more, and being able to see the comfort in somebody who can understand you, who's learned to communicate with you when you are unable to speak, and seeing that. I mean, most everybody seemed to sort of start to understand Group pretty quickly, or at least in the second movie, they sort of already understood what he was saying for the most part. But especially in the first movie, Rocket being able to just understand what he was saying was awesome in that way.
All right, so we talked quite a bit about neurodivergent representation and neurodivergent coding. Let's switch to more queer coding and characters that either are queer in the media that they star in, or that you have headcanoned as queer. I have mentioned Loki earlier, and Loki is actually in canon both gender fluid and pansexual, although that doesn't come up very often. Neither of these things come up very often. If you want to read a really good storyline about Loki being at least presented as very gender fluid, I would suggest Agents of Asgard, because that's where it's mentioned most often. But it's very rare in comics that you see it, and it hasn't come up in the movies, for example, at all. And so I do appreciate the entire world of fan canons of gay ships with Loki, of all the artwork that's out there that shows Loki either as completely gender fluid or as a feminine presentation of Loki that basically expands on what little canon has provided us. And so I want to have you also talk about this sort of area of the fandom giving us queer representation.
The first thing that comes to mind with regard to that is a very, I think, famous one, which is referred to as Storm Pilot from Star Wars. Specifically Finn and Poe. And my impression is that the actor who plays Poe is very interested in pushing more of that representation, but in terms of actually being allowed to, he's not. They've not really extended upon that. And that's, they're going to go various ways, but that's something, especially between characters who are people of color, I've found, comfort and interest. It makes the story less about boring white people. So that's one for me.
I think the biggest one for me has been Steven Universe. They've been really they haven't shied away from the fact that Ruby and Sapphire, which make up Garnet, they're obviously, I mean, they usually tend not to really have much of a gender, but they're presented as feminine or femme. It's just really nice to see that in children's media, especially. I'm a mom, so I have to be really aware of the media my child consumes. And Steven Universe does have its issues, but I think when it comes to queer representation, they've been doing a really good job in that regard. This is not. That's you just don't get to see a lot of lesbian relationships. There, when queer representation is, or like same-sex relationships are shown on TV, is usually gay men. Just seeing two women characters be in a healthy relationship is a really big deal. It's, especially important when it's a show that's aimed at children, because there's this idea where same-sex relationships are taboo or automatically sexual, so we can't show children because their little minds will explode or something. That one, and also the relationship between Sailor Neptune and Sailor Uranus in Sailor Moon. And at least in the original Japanese, it was shown as it was a lesbian relationship, and a lot of the time also Sailor Uranus was kind of ambiguous when it came to her gender. There were a lot of characters who be like, "Was she a boy? Is she a girl?" And she was like, "What does it matter?" And just so those are like the two biggest ones for me that I've also let my child see, because it's really important that she understands that there's people come in all different, shapes, sizes, orientations, genders, and so yeah.
I was just going to add really quick to the Ruby and Sapphire thing. Also, a portrayal of a relationship that's queer and has more to it. Like, one of the ways that queer relationships can be sort of turned invisible is there's never any conflict. So, like, if there is, they actually show them at conflict and resolving it, and it's good and reasonable within the context of the relationship, so that it actually puts it at the foreground so that you see it and experience it in a positive way overall.
I also think Steven Universe has the only non-binary character I've ever seen represented on television in Stevani. The fusion between Steven and Connie. They go by non-binary pronouns, they, them. Have long hair and visible breasts, but also stubble, and that's normal. It's lovely. I don't know if there are any other non-binary characters on television. Nah?
Yeah, I don't think there are any that are just... This is a non-binary character, and it's very upfront about it being a non-binary character. Like, they're not implying anything. It's just very out there. So let's talk a bit more about the fan art, fan fiction side of it. What are the sort of favorite areas, whether it is for what you create or what you read, watch, enjoy on the internet? What sort of, what themes do you look for? Which characters do you enjoy reading or creating about? I'm just going to out myself as a currently horrible Frost Iron trash. Frost Iron being the ship between Loki the Frost Giant and Iron Man, which was created around the time the first Avengers movie came out, and it basically sparked from just two interactions between the two characters, where it's grown into this, at least for me, fairly huge fandom. I don't read fan fiction quite as much, but I enjoy the fan Tumblrs that are mostly just GIF collections, or the sort of Ask Frost Iron storylines where people ask a Tumblr questions and they just answer them in pictures or in GIFs. It's fun. That's what it is, basically.
Alright, I'm also going to out myself here because I've been reading a lot of Raylo. Rey and Kylo Ren. Last Jedi got me, and I know it's a terrible ship, but I love it so much.
I think one of my favorites, and I don't read much of fan fiction, but I do my stuff is most like visual stuff. Storm Pilot is definitely one of my favorites. It's just both characters of color, and it's just, which for me is also a big deal. But I just really love, like, I just like thinking of like them just being super gay and in space, and it's just makes me happy.
That's so cute.
Yeah, it's adorable. It's also a lot of I've seen a lot of fan art with Harley and Poison Ivy. And I love that. I just love the idea that Harley just kicked the Joker to the curb, and she's so much better and happier now that she ditched the man. Yeah, those are the two biggest ones for me.
I do tend towards either Tumblr short fiction, where it's just sort of like a post of what somebody has posted there to read, or art. There's one particular GIF that I love dearly, which is it's Finn doing curls, and in one hand he has Poe, who gives him a kiss, and then the other hand is Rey, who gives him a kiss, which just kills me. I love it so much. I'm struggling to find other examples, but that's the one that's been sort of burning a hole in my brain since people started talking about that.
All right, thanks. We do have a few questions, so I think now is a good time to switch over to just a little bit of Q&A. I'm going to read the questions, and then whoever wants to answer them can just go ahead. All right. Our first question is from Jess, asking, do you remember the first queer character portrayal you encountered? About how old were you at the time, and what about it stood out to you? How has it impacted you? Okay, so I'm going to start real quick. It wasn't a real representation. Like I said, I had canoned it, and I think later became official canon, but that was much later, was the Batman animated series with Harley and Ivy, but that was at most implied in the actual show. It was just the first sort of more than just friends situation that I saw. I think the show ran when I was like 7, 8-ish, if I remember correctly. And then the first actual queer representation of a character, that might have been the kiss on Deep Space Nine, actually. I don't remember how old I was. I was a teenager, I think.
I'm trying to think about the first queer representation I saw, and it might have been terribly like Will and Grace. Brokeback Mountain. Confused one of those. High school, college age. It's like I did not go out and look at a lot of media. Maybe, actually, no. Before that, Rocky Horror Picture Show. That's the one. The very first anything queer that I ever saw must have been that. I was youngish.
Thank you for reminding me of that, because I was probably about, I don't know, 8 or 10 years old, and my parents decided it was a good idea to watch that as a family in our living room. So my religious, like very religious, they apparently loosened up for a while, and then...
How was that awkward?
I mean, they didn't do the normal Shadowcast things, though we did throw toast and rice across the living room. So I really have no idea what they were thinking, and I haven't had the opportunity to ask them about it since then. But the older I got and the more queer I got, the more I was like, okay, I mean, watch it with your 5 kids at the time. I don't know. I definitely do think that it did plant some seeds. A pretty enduring love of Tim Curry. Granted, of course, there's a lot of things that are especially problematic about Rocky Horror Picture Show. And it's not an excuse that for a great many people, that was sort of the only representation that they had. We've certainly been having more and more, and it's sort of on a roll over the last 10, 20 years or more. But at the same time, it doesn't stop it from being meaningful to people, myself included, I think.
There is a reason we need fan fiction and fan art, and that's what the whole panel's about, right? A representation is like, it means a lot to us, but objectively is kind of not great. Not
Exactly.
great.
For me, it was Will and Grace, which was, I think I was definitely under 12. And I grew up in Puerto Rico, which is like 97% Roman Catholic, so that was like a big thing. But yeah, I remember especially this one episode where Jack was complaining because he didn't see much queer representation on TV, and there was this show that he liked to watch, and they were supposed to be showing a gay kiss, and they did the whole like cutaway before the characters kissed in the show, and he was really upset about that. And I think they were like at the Today Show, because he was basically protesting it, and he said something about like, why is it that I can never see, 2 gay men kiss each other on TV? Like, I'm never gonna get that. And Will was like, I think you will. And then Will grabbed him and like kissed him right there and so like everybody saw the kiss. And that was like the first time that I saw 2 men kissing where it wasn't like made as a joke. Because a lot of the TV shows that I used to watch when I was little, which was like local programming, the gay characters tended to be very effeminate, and there was a lot of like stereotypes, and it was just a lot of laughing at them about it. So that was the first time that I saw 2 gay men kiss, or 2 men kiss, and it wasn't like, like funny or, and I just remember watching that. I was like, that's a thing, Yeah, so that was like the big one for me, which, I mean, Will and Grace is like not the greatest show on earth, but at the time that was like a huge thing for me because I'd never seen it before.
I remember when Ellen came out on her show. That was a big deal.
That actually was you talking about Will and Grace reminded me of that as well, and that was definitely me as a kid being exposed more through mainstream. Though I knew like Rocky Horror Picture Show was not something that you saw everywhere. Like, it was still definitely a sort of a cult phenomenon. Whereas Ellen DeGeneres, who had her show in the 90s, was a very, very popular show. Granted, once she came out and the character on the show came out, it didn't last much longer than that, unfortunately. But it was definitely a prominent mainstream exposure that I had.
Talking about Ellen, just reminded me that I actually did see. This is not fictional representation, but I grew up in Germany, and there's a relatively famous comedian who has been out as a lesbian for a very long time, and in the early 90s mid 90s. She was on a lot of game shows and other TV shows, and she was an out lesbian. It just didn't really mean anything to a kid that was watching her be like, she was making jokes that were somewhat sexual, but still like stuff you could show on afternoon TV. So she was the first person I knew was a lesbian. It just didn't mean anything because nothing that she ever did connected to that or mentioned it in any way, because that was not the TV she was making. That was not what she could say on TV. But she was the first person that I knew of that she was a lesbian that I saw on TV. I guess you could say that way. All right. I'm going to move to the next question. And it's a good question, but unfortunately, I don't know the answer to it. And I hope maybe somebody else does. It's from William, and he asks, which artists and producers are supportive of fan art and which are the most opposed? And like I said, I don't really know about that at all.
Recently, Charlie Day from the new Pacific Rim movie plays one of the scientists, talked on a red carpet event about how cool it was that fans, basically that the ship between the two scientists that the fans came up with, when he heard about that, he actually thought that was a really great idea, and it makes the characters better to play it that way, and it influenced his acting. He gave a shout out to the fans for doing that, which is the first time I've seen somebody, an actor, do that so publicly. But someone was saying earlier about Oscar Isaac, the actor who plays Poe Dameron in Star Wars, being very enthusiastic about it. And the counterpoint that comes immediately to mind is Anne Rice, who famously used to sue fan fiction authors who wrote fan fiction about her stuff.
Yeah, the places that I see the encouragement of fan fiction the most, which of course is colored by what I experience, but I see huge amounts of encouragement when it comes to people who have YouTube channels or stream on Twitch. They will actively solicit, say, if you have fan fiction, send it to me. Markiplier is a big one where he just is on Tumblr almost every day and he reblogs fan fiction or fan art and stuff like that. And will occasionally do things and give away things to people who have made fan art of him that is really awesome.
All right. The third question is a little bit long and complicated, but let's see if I can get that through coherently. What do you make of instances where canonically plausible but not outright stated that a character is marginalized in some matter? So things like Black Hermione or Autistic Hermione or gay Remus or gay Dumbledore. And do you feel that fan works that roll with these headcanons are different in any way than fan works that depict the character as being marginalized, but assume that the depiction is against the actual official canon? Did that make sense?
I personally take a very Mark Hamill point of view, which is the characters are yours. Do whatever makes you feel good about it. Whether or not it's something that the creators might have thought was a good idea years after the fact or not. But
I don't know, it definitely feels like it falls in line with mainstream creators not actually giving representation, just sort of like hinting at it or keeping it in the sidelines, not necessarily ever saying whether Hermione was black or not, is sort of along those lines of it could have been specific representation, but it was not, and it's definitely just sort of, I would put it as another example of fan art and fan fiction and headcanons being a place where you can have that where mainstream media fails, definitely.
I think to answer specifically the question of do you feel that fan works that well with these different headcanons are significant or different in a way, I mean, I think they are, because if there's like little hints of sort of oh my god, I forgot how to speak. That there's little hints of it, and then you see other people pick up on those hints, it makes you feel like maybe you're not imagining things. And you know, it's good to have that sort of validation from other fans, because you know, I think people, or at least for me, I tend to be like, no, I'm just, you know, reading too much into it, and you know, I shouldn't do that, which, you know, I shouldn't, you know, beat myself up over that, but you know, anxiety brain will do that. Yeah, I think, yeah, so I think it is it is significant in a way where if it's not a headcanon, seeing those fan works will make me feel good, but not as much as seeing things where they made Hermione black or autistic, you know, because they picked up those little cues as I did. I don't know if any of that made sense, but
Yeah, I sort of got what you were talking about.
Yeah.
All right. Then we have another question from Jess. You have mentioned problematic representations in media, for example, queer coding villains. What are some of your favorite examples of representation that is actually positive, healthy, supportive of or to the community they're representing?
Well, I mean, we already talked about Ruby and Sapphire and their relationship in Steven Universe, which is, I believe, a healthy and supportive representation there.
And that's about it.
yeah, that was going to be my answer as well. That's been the only one that I've actually seen.
Yes, I was gonna just not answer this question because Steven Universe is also just going to be the only thing I could think of. So apparently that's the only one we all can remember.
Yeah.
It's Ruby and Sapphire being one, and then we also mentioned Stevani earlier as not just a good representation, but pretty much the only real non-binary representation in on TV shows. Other than that, they are all problematic. All of them. All of them.
I like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend's relationship between Daryl and White Josh, but the language I just used should tell you that there is problematic elements in just all of it. But it's still a kind of healthy relationship with me.
All right, and we have hopefully time for one more quick question from Call Me Joe. I recently learned that the original Phantom of the Opera novel had an Iranian character who almost never appeared in later adaptations. Were you ever pleasantly surprised by the degree of diversity and representation in earlier incarnations of famous stories?
No.
I am also struggling to come up with an example. I'm sure that there might be one or two out there, but nothing comes to mind.
Yeah, pretty much the only. It's not a representation issue, but it's this joke about how Frankenstein's monster in movies just groans and doesn't say anything, but is this fairly articulate, yet clearly not quite normal, however you want to define that, being. So you have a a good representation actually of something that is marginalized, however you want to define that, and then later it just became the monster. But that's literally the only thing I can think of, and it's not a good example.
Yeah, everything that I can think of keeps coming back to this is just, reasonable, good media that the mainstream media has just sort of whitewashed and made worse, which is not what they were looking for.
Hey, folks, just to let you know, we are at about 5 minutes before the end of the panel. I want to give you a chance to wrap up, but before I do, I just want to let you know that I'm totally Stucky trash. Steve and Bucky.
Yes, oh my god. Totally forgot about that.
So go ahead and wrap up whatever you feel you need as your last words.
I don't think I have anything other than yes, Stucky.
Absolutely.
I support it.
Yep.
All right, in that case, I think we can wrap up here and move on to the next panel, which I don't remember what that is.
That would be Atheism in the Diaspora. You can find it at the-orbit.net. Take care, everybody. Thanks.